I never quite thought we would be venturing to the world of Magic the Gathering in this series, especially with the long success of the franchise and MTG Arena. And certainly not under these circumstances. MTG has sort of killed a game already in this series, but this time we cover an MTG branded game that died so fast the game never even launched. Cryptic Studios, a name known in the online space for their creation and development of two superhero MMOs, Champions Online, and the venerable, already covered on this series but still thriving on community servers, City of Heroes. Cryptic also had forays into the world of Neverwinter, Star Trek, and back to the topic of this video, MTG, or Magic the Gathering. When news hit the web that Cryptic Studios was doing an MTG MMO, the internet erupted. Sure, the company had a bit of a cryptic past, okay, sorry, I couldn't resist, but after many years of secrets and the promise of a possible Magic MMO, Magic Legends, as the project was dubbed, developed by Cryptic Studios and published by Perfect World Entertainment, would finally be unveiled to the world and testing phases. And just as soon as the game was revealed to the world, it was taken from it, with the shutdown just announced back in June 2021 targeted for later in the fall. What went wrong with the online Magic ARPG? Why did it fail so spectacularly and suddenly? In this episode, we will diagnose the largest contributing factors to the death of a game, Magic Legends. Grab your mana, your planeswalker of choice, and choose your build for this title that went up in flames faster than a mono Red Rush detectives. The story starts back in 2017, upon the very announcement of the game itself. Cryptic Studios had acquired a license to work on a Magic the Gathering game. Well, more specifically, Perfect World Entertainment, who had been their parent company since they acquired them back in 2011. Cryptic Studios has had a long history of making online RPGs, being the developer behind famed superhero pioneer MMO City of Heroes, which launched back in 2004 and had a storied but troubled career as an MMO, one that I have already covered in this series as I mentioned at the top. Speaking of games we have already covered on this series, we have also covered Star Trek Online, and someday we will also cover Champions Online. There are some unique reasons at play for each of these games that struggle to be considered successes even in their heydays, but perhaps there was a bit of questioning about the process to be had. These games didn't do poorly per se, they certainly have fans, but they were definitely better at making money than being fun, according to some fans, which works sometimes until you push too far into a certain direction. Perfect World Entertainment, who had acquired Cryptic Studios back in 2011, clearly thought that there was enough profit there to acquire or use these IPs strategically. The reason I mentioned Cryptic Studios having a history of failed or, being most charitable, lackluster online titles, besides it being insanely relevant, is to set tone for what would be the developer of the game we are covering in this series, but also because there were potentially enough tribulations to even give the parent company Perfect World Entertainment pause regarding entrusting the company with a new powerful IP. Whether or not Cryptic could cook up something closer to their first hit or something closer to their still successful but rather dry and bland other titles reliant on established IPs would remain to be seen. Perfect World Entertainment was certainly believing they could at the very least get a repeat of the monetary successes they had on Star Trek Online and Neverwinter. Details concerning Magic Legends would hit the web January 16, 2017 in the way of an official blog post with lead designer Phil Zaleski. MTG is a very complex turn-based card game with varied mechanics, robust lore, and gorgeous iconic artwork. According to Zaleski, Cryptic Studios was attempting to capture all of this essence and translate it into a dynamic, real-time action RPG. On top of an action combat for Magic Legends, the game would be boasting a rotating deck system. I guess this is where Cryptic kind of figured, hey, we have cards in MTG normally, why not introduce them here? The idea was kind of simple. Players were able to rotate between a number of cards and spells that are ultimately then randomized and available for use, once before randomizing again. These were separate from typical class abilities and had longer cooldowns, but straight out of the gate there was like this weird serious contention from the action combat audience already. ARPGs had very predictable and understandable rotations and ways of kind of playing the map and clearing it. You use the same abilities over and over again, and that's largely the predictable gameplay loop that people have enjoyed thus far in the genre. Still, Magic Legends was leaning on their deck-making mechanics, even if this alienated or made them take certain risks in the ARPG space. Another key element of the gameplay in Magic Legends, which from all signs thus far were looking more like an online ARPG or perhaps an MMORPG than an MMORPG, was the Planeswalker mechanic. Planeswalkers, much to the chagrin of the MTG fans, are the new focus for the franchise. You summon them as elite summoner-style cards, and then they can serve a purpose on the board and often create new creatures. They would be making an appearance in MTG Legends as well, serving as the centerpiece for the game, where you as the player would play as your customized very own Planeswalker. This was a stark contrast to previous Planeswalkers though, which kind of was the whole point in MTG pivoting to them in the first place, at least I think. It's the name recognition that comes with these same Planeswalkers being used and the same Planeswalkers in rotations. You discovered new spells for your Planeswalker as you traveled throughout the world in Magic Legends and summoned creatures to fight for your cause. This could end up being very problematic though, as ARPGs already have a crazy amount of mobs on screen and a bunch of action and particle effects and you name it. It can kind of be hard to focus sometimes. Now imagine you are a character that literally spawns more characters as a mechanic on screen while fighting a lot of characters. Well, you can see the issues. The mana mechanic from MTG would make an appearance as well, albeit a brief one and a non-consequential one, unfortunately. They were the basis of classes that you could choose to play as, but other than that, you could kind of mix and match the bunch of different colors without any sort of consequence, and those would just merge into your chosen class color. This ends up making the mana stuff feel like a half-finished gimmick that serves no real purpose past character creation. Magic Legends closed beta would be announced in January 2020, later for spring in the same year. In the same month, it would also be announced that Cryptic would be bringing Magic Legends to consoles, first the PS4, and eventually the Xbox release too. Cryptic Studios would showcase Magic Legends at PAX East in March of 2020. This is the first real time we had seen the game, as trailers up to this point hadn't had any gameplay contained in them, really. Although the graphics were bad in Magic Legends, they barely look like MTG in my opinion. For starters, the contrasting art style MTG is known for, with the colors and such, is noticeably absent in Magic Legends. Instead, the game is a bit more shiny and glossy, which is way more typical of Cryptic Studios games. Which is very likely due to the fact that Cryptic Studios would use their in-house engine on the game, which would cause a number of issues in their other games, as we will later find in this video for this game as well. The other noticeable things about MTG Legends that was seemingly problematic in the gameplay demo footage that took place at PAX East was the camera. The game was supposed to be more of a 3D action style game where you can actually pan the camera around, but the issue is you can't actually tilt the camera. It's on like a fixed character plane, which is like regressing even past like Neverwinter Nights 1, which came out in like early 2000s. This causes innumerable viewing issues and also makes for a rather clunky looking and feeling camera. This was something almost universally disliked by large outlets who covered the game and the many player perspectives I have read and been sent. Magic Legends wasn't looking like an ugly game per se, it just wasn't looking enough like MTG for some, and this was worrying because the game seemed to be in some ways attempting to cater to the MTG fanbase that, well, they're making a game in. But visually being unable to represent what those players would like or actually enjoy would be a pretty huge mistake. It's not like they didn't have access to the source material either, but perhaps using their own engine, again, was causing these issues for Cryptic Studios. Over the course of the rest of the year in 2020, we have the start of the global pandemic, which kind of derails all game development and the world, really. But during this time and leading into 2021, we notice advertisements for Magic Legends beta ramp up heavily. At this time, players start to realize that the game is not at all what's being sold, and it's already being heavily monetized even in beta. Other criticisms already outlined aside, and perhaps more that we haven't got to already, the main issue under fire immediately with Magic Legends was concerning the M in MMORPG, the M that stands for massive. Now, the MMO industry is no stranger to having terminology not properly defined, or defended to the point that it's kind of practically useless and just used for marketing purposes, which is kind of the reason it was chosen for in the first place, by the way. Many other MMOs aren't at all massive, as if we suddenly skipped from always online multiplayer games, or MORPGs as they typically would go by, like Guild Wars 1 or Phantasy Star 1, but let's just focus on Magic Legends. Why was Magic Legends taking so much flack concerning its usage of the MMORPG tag? Well, the max amount of players for an adventure was 3. Yep, you heard me right, 3 players. Sure, there was an overworld map like in Diablo where you could actually see other players more than 3, but it wasn't by much. the game was in no shape or form massive, and although it was certainly an always online game, thus qualifying more as an MMORPG versus just an ARPG or an RPG with multiplayer. Cryptic Studios explained that although they started with aspirations of being an MMO, that shifted towards more of being like an action RPG. Now I'm curious what they mean by having a lot of MMO in there in the first place, and this is why I take issue with games using the MMORPG genre tag. What is exactly unique about the genre itself? It's not the RPG part, it's not having multiplayer features like a friends list grouping or etc. Not exactly. Other games have those things too. What's unique about MMORPGs is the combination of three main concepts, and we will keep them simple for this video. Let's start with the first one. Persistence. So the world remains or is able to be changed by players and thus remains as such, a key element in any MMORPG. Player interactivity. This means that the game is built in a way that requires players to function to a certain extent. This is a social world aspect of the game needing players to populate and drive the world. Finally, the last aspect, the players. Massive. But what does massive mean? How many players is massive? Well, unfortunately, it was never really defined truly. In 1999, they were trying to break 200 players as the goal. Asheron's Call and many other games were able to beat this goal. When technology has advanced, is this number still 200 players in 2021? A topic maybe for another video, but Magic Legends clearly had below Asheron's Call ideas of massive even. Well, below it. The game wasn't an MMO, and I'm going to be bold and say it wasn't really ever one. Suddenly tacking on social mechanics and mechanics MMOs made famous and staples is not making an MMO. As lead designer Adam Atenu complains, Cryptic Studios had to work against a lot of MMORPG-like perceptions. Almost like if you advertise to a certain genre, people will potentially hold you accountable for that genre. This is why I urge games to be properly defined. It's in the best interests of all parties except those trying to make a buck off of you. Now I'll be charitable and amend that by saying sometimes people just like things because they sound cool. But sound cool or not, fans of the MMORPG genre had held Cryptic Studios to the fire over Magic Legends, causing them to cease calling their game in one public shaming of sorts. Shame, shame, shame. I have to admit, this was very satisfying for me to see. I have been crying and preaching this stuff for a long time, and I will continue to do so because I believe in it. But it felt good to see the community react and actually police a game improperly being sold and advertised as an MMORPG. Some fans even predicted that this would happen before the game even went into beta. Open beta for Magic Legends would hit sometime at the end of March 2021. After a few days of impressions, players were already in a frenzy concerning monetization and frame rate issues. For starters, with monetization, players realized that a certain class was hidden behind a paywall. The Dimmer Assassin class was a top-tier random drop from a booster pack, each pack costing $3. The class itself could also be purchased with in-game gold, but the grind was so ludicrous to where it's pointless to even try. Dimmer Assassin was the only class behind this paywall, with the other 5 classes being free and unlocked from the start. You could convert your currencies to Aether, so you could pay to skip the grind because Aether was used in upgrading armor, artifacts, cards, and your base. With 2 different battle pass tiers to pay, limits on resource gathering daily, pay to skip progression and boosters, Magic Legends was dipping its metaphorical hands into nearly every form of monetization imaginable. This could have been the influence of Perfect World Entertainment's acquisition back in 2011, a company sort of known for this monetization beforehand, which had a noticeable shift on their monetization strategies and such, but it's impossible to say for sure if it's just PWE, or maybe a little bit of Cryptic too. The other large issue plaguing players testing the game in open beta was frame rate issues. While the game was good looking in some ways, it didn't warrant the sheer performance it needed or required. It was also running better on older machines than newer machines, as if it wasn't properly optimized for such. And although the game was an open beta, it was clear according to numerous player testimonies I have been sent that Cryptic Studios, when pushing Magic Legends to beta from alpha, neglected to fix many of the bugs and issues present in the game. It was to the point that I was told by one player that many other players were able to exploit certain mob spawns and the economy of the game to accrue insane game-breaking wealth. That these issues had been present since alpha, worst of all. Many more bugs, as you can see on screen, were present in the game, and beta or not, there was no excuse. Popular streamer, caster, TCG, CCG player Day9 rated the game a...
Yeah, it's either a 0 or a 1. I mean, it's awful. It was awful.
And well, the other impressions thus far weren't much more positive, specifically regarding the deck system we outlined at the start. Coming from a huge Magic fan and fan of card games in general, and well, a pretty fair and reasoned person in my experience, and I had the pleasure of meeting him back at PAX once, this was a pretty scathing criticism from Day 9 concerning Magic Legends. IGN gave them a better score than 1 out of 10, but not by much, giving the game a low 5 out of 10. The fans on the Magic Legends subreddit were echoing these sentiments, stating that Magic Legends simply wasn't ready for an open beta for a number of reasons already outlined, but also concerning how long it takes to even get to and customize and build your own deck, which is kind of a key feature in the franchise, right? More damaging was the claims that the story was very poor, and that there was next to no character development players felt. This might be one of the most battered games we have covered on this series, unlike other titles we have covered that had certain missteps and maybe zigged when they should have zagged. Magic Legends was trying to do too much and failing at nearly everything it was attempting to do. Some longtime MTG fans were hoping Cryptic Studios would still stick it out and get to work on those bugs and issues that were reported back in alpha, and try to get the game functional first, right? But with issues in game design, performance, a lack of character development and story, and the monetization issues on top of it all, the wounds were seemingly too deep for the yet-to-launch online ARPG. Unfortunately, surprising or not, the news hit the web on June 29th, 2021 that Magic Legends would be shutting down in October of 2021. This would result in the canceling of the console versions of the game, as well as the PC launch. Cryptic Studios in their release expressed no interest in reviving the game in the future, while executive producer Steven Ricossa simply stated that the vision for Magic Legends missed the mark, while, as the Polygon article also states, providing no further explanation. Developers likely stayed tight-lipped out of understandable fear of further employment, or unwillingness to take any fault for what became of Magic Legends, the ARPG that was unable to launch despite the very backing of the Magic Gathering IP and Wizards of the Coast. Just like that, nearly as it was revealed to the majority of the public, Magic Legends had development halted with a shutdown to come later in the year. We covered the game's issues like monetization, the bugginess in performance, the whole not being an MMORPG thing at length, but there's a few more issues I wanted to get to concerning Magic Legends before we put this case to bed. While it might feel like a good idea to blame the death of Magic Legends on Wizards of the Coast and the Magic IP, they have been kind of known to cancel games on occasion, arguably without giving them the proper support they needed after all, but I really struggle here to place the sole blame or even a large amount of the blame on them. Instead, I think the largest issues from Magic Legends come from Cryptic Studios themselves. They had no experience making an ARPG, and as I outlined from the start, Cryptic Studios might have had some success putting out online games in general, but to be rather blunt, City of Heroes was their last major hit, and they lost the vast majority of that talent after apparently forcibly selling the IP to their game to NCSoft, which is why NCSoft never let Paragon Studios, where the refugee devs had gone to run the project, purchase the project, which kinda led to the game having this whole crazy underground private server scene. Now, I'm not trying to say Cryptic was totally at fault there, but they kinda did sell the IP so the devs couldn't actually use the IP. That's Cryptic Studios. They then grabbed some very successful and well-known IPs and made rather, well, bland titles from them. I know Star Trek Online fans already hate me as it is, but most of them also acknowledge that the only redeeming thing about STO is the story. Meanwhile, Neverwinter Nights Online, I can't deny. I can't hide my bias. I can't stand the game. Not just because of the monetization, because that's also prevalent in STO, but because the game itself feels a lot less like an online game and a massive step backwards than Neverwinter Nights 1 or 2's multiplayer. You can tell the game utilizes the same Cryptic engine in both of these games, and Magic Legends by extension, which is not that weird, right? Using the same in-house engine saves costs and you keep updating the same engine, right? The issue is as well, the engine doesn't really seem to be any good. The engine can barely run any players on screen at the same time. So much so that they practically invented the fake NPCs that most games like SWTOR and Final Fantasy XIV utilize these days, where the NPCs sometimes aren't actually characters with behavior patterns, they're just visual models with animations playing. They have no properties to them elsewise, and you can't even click or view them in-game. Cryptic has to utilize these because apparently, their engine struggles to have many actors and players on screen at the same time, to the point that they haven't made an MMORPG truly since City of Heroes Online. The other games we've mentioned are MORPGs. They barely have any massive content above 25 players, let alone 32 players. But it's not just my opinion when, well, the proof is literally in the pudding. The game came and went faster than a sex joke. Specifically, there were two large issues the game suffered from that I directly correlate to either a lack of talent or a lack of understanding the market that they were in or chose. They tried to make an MTG spin on Diablo to a certain extent, but instead of taking something and finding ways to then lean on MTG's strengths, they took risks on things like the deck and mana mechanics that players just simply didn't enjoy. And then you have the beautiful art of MTG, what it's kind of known for, really. Even when I didn't play the paper version as a kid, I couldn't help but be impressed by the art style, and I'm not alone there. Cryptic Studios had access to this source art, and Wizards were even giving them the chance to really showcase things like the Planeswalkers that were supposed to be showcased later in a Netflix series. Whether it was their limited engine that kept Cryptic from truly realizing this art, or a lack of understanding the IP they chose itself, clearly it didn't translate at all well in the end. Cryptic Studios with Magic Legends showed a clear misunderstanding of both the MMORPG and the ARPG markets. Something we say a lot on the Death of a Game series is you don't always get to choose as a developer what genre your game ends up in. And if you do end up choosing a few genres and having perceptions from these said genres, be careful with satisfying those perceptions and desires lest you incur the wrath of the fan bases, plural. MMO nor ARPG fans were happy with Magic Legends. Not even Magic fans were big enough fans of the game either. Alright detectives, I feel like we can finally take the evidence and clues gathered thus far and put this case to bed, the case of Magic Legends and the death of Magic Legends. That's enough gaping wounds in this project covered thus far. Start that music please, Tom. We have a case to solve. Cryptic Studios has had a history of mediocre projects since City of Heroes. Magic Legends ignored and failed typical ARPG and MMORPG conventions that angered fans. Magic Legends is a total visual mess of clutter and spawned creatures. Sold incorrectly as an MMORPG. Design is limited and plagued with just about every monetization scheme under the sun. The magic elements are seemingly a passing thought and miss the mark where and when implemented. There's not much to add to the rest of the story here, detectives. It's clear that Cryptic Studios isn't my favorite company, and well, Magic Legends clearly wasn't my favorite game after testing it in early alpha. I usually have words of encouragement here, and words that are meant to make others take a look or gather perspective on a certain topic or idea, or maybe the game itself. Sometimes merely to not make these videos seem so negative, as that's not really my intention. But well, sometimes the video will inevitably be a negative one, or concerning a game that not many of us have much positive to say about. But I don't have to keep harping on it. So let me know in the comments below what you thought of Magic Legends, and why you liked or hated the game. Oh, and as for the hint, I'll just tell you guys since we skipped the queue already to make this Death of a Game recent for you guys. The next Death of a Game is going to be Realm Royale. Thanks for watching, guys.